Hello and welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I am Bob Arnold, President here at Disaster Cover Journal. Today's sponsor is Virtual Corporation, and the topic today is Business Continuity Management and Disaster Recovery on a Limited Budget. Before we get started, I want to review a couple housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. This recording will be shared with everyone tomorrow via an automated email. Attendees are also in a listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask any questions, please use the question panel you locate on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many of these questions as possible at the end of the session. Also, the slides are available for download, again found on the right-hand side of your screen under the Downloads tab. Now back to today's topic on business continuity management and disaster recovery on a limited budget. Our presenter today is Michael Beth. Michael leads the professional services practice at Virtual Corporation. With 22 plus years in business continuity and disaster recovery, Michael has served in various leadership and is experienced in driving business and technical resiliency solutions across a variety of industries. As a certified professional, he has the skills to lead customers through the project delivery lifecycle, which ultimately improves their resiliency while reducing potential risks, threats, and overall costs. With no further introductions, I'd like to turn the mic over now to Michael.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your day and your busy schedules to sit with myself as I go through a conversation around business continuity management, disaster recovery. As you see in the title, I'm really focusing in on the idea that, you as an individual, as a leader in this space, will be responsible for all aspects, business continuity, crisis management, disaster recovery. That's in concept, what I had in mind here, but knowing full well that that's not always the case. You may only be responsible in your organization from a business continuity perspective. You may be focused on DR, and a lot of these parts and pieces are oftentimes segmented out or broken up into different parts of the organization, from what I've seen over the years in my experience. So with that lens on that, let us kind of begin. And all right. Obviously, this is myself. I'm sure with the number of folks on in the attendee list, we probably have bumped into each other at a DRJ conference, maybe as a customer, or know someone that knows me or that I know you. So wanted to put a face with the name, and thanks Bob for the introduction. And with that, I'll go on to kind of what I like to always say to folks, while the program, is complex in nature, try and, vision yourself, like a general. Picture of George Patton here, general of the U.S. Army during World War II. He was working as a leader and as a person that was in charge of many different portions of the military arm at that time, and met with, a lot of different individuals across different armies. So much like yourselves, you're going to be working with a lot of cross-functional teams. You're going to be working with C-level leadership down to individual contributors. So while maybe the task at hand is very complex, try and keep, the idea of keeping it simple. I've seen a lot of organizations and individuals get into that term, analysis paralysis, where there's so many tasks and activities and areas to work on. They get really bogged down and don't get things accomplished because they want things to be perfect on this task before they move on to the next. So keep it simple. A good plan, even if it's not completely thought out, is better than a plan, a methodology, an approach, a strategy, a design that hasn't even been considered. So from an agenda perspective, I said, hopefully I'm not gonna, for those individuals who may have been doing this a long time. I'm hoping there's some nuggets of information that you might be able to glean from this presentation that will help you think of things in maybe a different light. And for those that maybe are new to these types of roles, I hope there's some good information in here that will allow you to, really begin to create the framework and the foundation for your program, depending on what that all includes, like we talked about. So try and go through a little bit of a process for really, if you're coming into a new organization as that thought leader in the business continuity and disaster recovery space, baselining really where you're at, trying to assess the organization. For a lot of companies, there may have not been an individual like yourselves in that role, so there may be little or nothing from a program framework perspective in place. However, for some, it's going to be a lot of varying parts and pieces that maybe came in through various leaders and folks that have maybe started and stopped and started and stopped the program along the way. So we'll talk about baselining it. We'll look for, who can support you in your role. You're going to need a lot of support. You're going to need to drive that support in the organization. Looking at prioritization of what should we do first, looking at some of the short and long-term aspects of things, and then creating or modifying, maturing the foundation, the program components, etc. And then the idea here is, if like I've seen in so many organizations, oftentimes it's a one-person show that's doing everything, and you're given little or no budget. So we've got some ideas, some free or low cost type of subscription or services at the end that might help you with some of those shortfalls when it comes to a budget perspective. So from a baseline perspective, coming into this role, I always like to not assume that I know everything. Assume that there are no processes, no policies, maybe no infrastructure in place to provide a DR capability. So you want to obviously kind of assess the situation. You're probably told certain things about the organization, but take it upon yourself to really take a step back and do a detailed assessment of what you might have, what you don't have. What do you think as a professional is needed beyond what you're seeing in place or that's missing today? You'll obviously want to try and gather as much information up front about aspects of the program, if there is any, as well as a lot of the plans, strategy documents, details around any sort of recovery configuration, setup, etc. So you're really looking at trying to assess where are people at in this process, because we have to account for them obviously from a process perspective, from a technology perspective. So we're looking across the organization at trying to baseline that. And so this slide, I know it's an eye chart. It's kind of there for effect. The idea that if you're coming in, you're saying, okay, I'm responsible for business continuity management and disaster recovery. So I have all of these different tasks, processes, areas that I have to look at. I have to understand what our budget, if any, which the idea here is that you don't really have much of a budget, and headcount, what that looks like, but also for those people that you're going to talk to on, say, the business side of the house, who may be involved in participating in business impact analysis or BIAs or any sort of testing down the road. What do they understand about the program? Do they have some sort of dedication to the program? Process, policy, defined service level agreements. What are we doing from a a command center perspective, are there things in place for that from a crisis management perspective? From a data center perspective, what's in place? You know, so there's all these different aspects that need to be obviously understood, vetted out, created, put into place depending on where they're at today. So again, the idea here is we know there's a lot, carve it up into little chunks, start to assess, and maybe you assess from a process perspective, from a people perspective, from a technology perspective. But you obviously all have some ways that you've done probably some of this in the past or might consider doing it as well. So don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot there to do. But the idea is, you know, it's an ongoing process like we've talked about many a times. So, you know, keep that in mind as you're moving forward into an assessment process. So, you know, go through the process to understand from a, you know, compliance, you know, perspective internally and within your industry. Are there standards you have to align to? Are there mandates from your leadership that you have to, you know, align to? So you want to understand those. You want to understand, like we talked about, is there some sort of framework or methodology in place? You know, is there one that, you know, maybe you can leverage from, you know, past experience, or if that's out there from a free subscription perspective to help you assess this, all these activities, you know, that help drive that the baseline. You know, your baseline becomes your storyboard, as I like to call it, your business case. So once you're able to, you know, go through assessing what you have, what's in place, what's missing, again, from a process, people, technology perspective, you have a, you know, a storyboard or business case to be able to then start to look at what are your opportunities. You know, you may have to address some of those mandates coming, you know, either from a, you know, a failed audit, or that came from a senior leader as you step into this role. But beyond that, you know, these will help create the opportunities, the short-term, long-term roadmap that you will be looking to drive in your organization. So from a support perspective, this is always, you know, always challenging of understanding, you know, where the support is going to come from, who's going to provide it, depending on how you're aligned in the organization, may dictate who are the executives or senior leaders that you report directly to. But also, you know, take some time to get to know these individuals on a, you know, personal and professional basis to understand if they have any sort of mandate to support you, to provide time, budget, and resources for your efforts that you're going to be coming to some of them to accomplish as part of your short and long-term roadmap. You know, they may have risk management, internal audit, or compliance type folks who also can be, you know, that you can leverage, that may be there to support you in your push to get some of these initiatives moving forward. Again, the assessment really, like I said, will provide you with identifying those kind of those quick wins, those opportunities, those items that need to get maybe put into place from more of a foundational perspective, as well as, you know, help drive and guide you in creation of a more of a short and long-term roadmap perspective going forward. So from support perspectives, you know, I've noticed over the years that you know, support comes in all shapes and forms. It comes in, you know, the executive level champion that, you know, is the reason maybe you were brought in to create or drive this program to, you know, a greater level of maturity. They may be maybe someone at a departmental level, either on the business side of your organization, on the technology side, maybe from an audit compliance perspective. Again, maybe they're the ones driving this program. It may be individual contributors, you know, people on the technology side that are, subject matter experts in certain areas that have taken it upon themselves, maybe like from a DR perspective, to really drive DR, even though there's never been a program or a mandate. They understand the value proposition for having capability in place and have been driving that already. So those types of individuals, and maybe various key stakeholders along the way as well. And from my perspective, I'm sure for most of you, you've seen, in your experience, that it comes in all sorts of flavors. Probably more to the left of the people that are oftentimes unaware, or that are draftees that have been tasked to participate or support you and are not really thrilled to be doing it because they've got 10 other jobs they're doing. The goal, obviously, over time is to create support at all levels of the organization, cross-functionally across the organization, so that we end up with more individuals that are on the loyalist and evangelist side of the house that want to support your program. They're coming to you during the annual planning process saying, hey, we need to commit some resources to the projects you have listed here, that are willing to enlist some of their folks, carve out time out of their schedules, etc. So think about that as you're going through your assessment effort, and you're starting to understand the different levels of support that are needed and that are out there, or that you need to try and create going forward. So obviously, once you do some assessment work, you understand some of the mandate you've been maybe tasked with from leadership or from your direct reports. You start to really try and prioritize where you're moving forward. And again, there may be items that you're going to focus on that are those quick wins, things that you can do that doesn't involve a lot of other individuals in the organization, and that may be specific to creation or improvement on some of the process, policy, and foundational elements that we'll talk about further in the presentation. But it's also then, like I said, focusing on creation of a short-term roadmap where we can make some tactical, some real tangible improvements. People can see the value that you're bringing to the organization, to their maybe to the department, to their individuals, things of that nature. And then driving the business case, creating the business case or the storyboard for that long-term, more strategic cross-functional efforts that will involve a lot of different organizations, as you get into, advanced planning, testing, so on and so forth. I think from my perspective, from a prioritization perspective, in customers that I've been involved with and internally in my own time running business continuity management disaster recovery program, I found a lot of value in building or creating, the methodology and framework for what it is, you're going to be doing in the organization. So, trying to align to standards, all of the methodology and documentation that you're going to be utilizing going forward, much like we've done here in this presentation, looking at it from an ISO standard perspective, defining a program mission and charter, and getting sign off at senior leadership for that and their role and involvement in supporting those that mission and charter. And then kind of creating a service offering methodology. So looking at the business continuity management disaster recovery ISO lifecycle that we have on, I think, a coming slide, creating the detail behind all of that, and maybe leveraging, an internal project, SharePoint site or website or whatever tools the organization you are with utilizes to provide some education and awareness and start to create that culture of education and awareness around the program and its components and how we provide services, because you're really, in my mind, kind of a service entity. You're providing a service to your internal and external customers, and we require time and effort from them to complete what it is we need to do. So think about building that. I've been in many organizations over the years who really didn't have a methodology or framework. They maybe had a three or four page policy document that said, yeah, we plan, we test, we do this or that, but that's really it. So it doesn't have to be robust, but it can be as robust as you feel is necessary to provide a strong understanding for your organization, for people that are looking at it like from a internal, external audit perspective as well. So on this slide, like I had said earlier, really am focusing on the framework, alignment to standards, taking the ISO plan, do, act, check methodology. And when we talked about the business continuity management, disaster recovery, service offering methodology, as I call it, that's really looking at, if we're providing a service around doing an assessment of a department, defining the requirements, for the department, defining a strategy for the people and the processes in a department. That really, again, is, those are in my mind, the services we are providing. And so that service offering goes into, creating some details around what is an assessment, how it's done, what are the outputs, what are the benefits, things of that nature. If we're doing a recovery strategy, a recovery design, et cetera, same thing. It's kind of really clarifying and outlining what is in that service and what are the outputs, what are the benefits, so on and so forth, and we'll go through that as well. So, I like to see an organization that's really, whether it's, ISO or it's some other, alignment to a standard, creating that framework, providing the service, offering methodology around how we're going to do that, create a lot of the tools and templates for how we're going to deliver this internally or externally to some of our customers. And then obviously, training people on it and creating, as much collateral internally from an educational and awareness perspective, so that you can speak to any individual in the organization, from a C-level individual down to individual contributors, and they have a basic understanding of what we're talking about in any given area going forward. So what I've gone and done here is the next series of slides is really focusing in on the, taking a step back after you've done your assessment work. You really understand, hey, maybe I don't have a lot of documentation that describes what the program and the BCDR lifecycle is providing to the organization, and going and understanding where I need to prioritize my work, saying, hey, I want to come back and address some of the framework, some of the foundational elements, and these go through and kind of align back to the ISO plan, do, check, act perspective. And so I want to talk through some of these that I think are very, very good to have built out in place to support your message going forward, your business case, all these areas of the foundational framework certainly support, if you have an internal, external audit coming in, giving them the kind of the roadmap and why it is we're doing certain things and who's doing what. So I think they're very helpful in getting things like these that we talk about in the next few pages done up front, maybe in parallel with some of the quick wins or some of the mandates that were given to you when you rolled into this position as well. So the first one is really around the program charter and program governance framework. I think it's it's important to really have both of these being very robust documents, in my opinion. I've seen many that are fairly flimsy, that have very little detail supporting them, leave a lot for people to look at and really wonder what it is we're trying to accomplish. So feel free to build these out. The charter, really want to focus on understanding what are the drivers of so are there mandates coming down from the board, from senior leadership? Are there external components from a industry perspective? For those that are maybe in the finance industry or the healthcare industry, we know there's a lot of different mandates from that area. Are there previous deficiencies in audit? And this goes back to the assessment of understanding what's been done in the past, what's either missing or in place. And understand the overall recovery readiness. So looking at it from are we able to recover people, process, technology, and defining what that means in the charter. Defining the program goals. Who are the champions? So go through that effort of understanding who are your stakeholders, who's going to champion this. Is it going to be a C-level executive? Is it going to be members of the board? And then defining stakeholders and roles and responsibilities for all these champions and individuals, because they're going to be key to driving your success as well, or to be leveraged for escalation if you've managed to exhaust all your avenues for gaining support with individuals, departments, etc. These are the individuals that can help you. Alignment with standards, like we talked about here, governing bodies, depending on the industry you're in. The government framework really should address more of the tactical aspect of supporting the program. So defining that executive steering committee, if there isn't one, understanding their compositions and roles, and defining all the response and recovery teams as well, and where those fit from a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective. And then we obviously have a list of benefits over here. It's not an exhaustive list, but the idea here is these are the types of things that internal, external audit, compliance, governing bodies, regulatory bodies are looking for to have in place. So the sooner you can get this in place, it aligns to and creates the start of your storyboard or your business case. So if you're going out to start some of these quick win projects or some of these short-term projects with various leaders in the organization, you can always fall back on, hey, here's why we've been tasked to do this. Here is the charter. Here is my champions, the stakeholders. Here is their mandate. Because like we said, you may have people, like we talked about with those individuals, those leaderships, those leaders that you go out to talk to may not be the ones that are an evangelist. They may be completely unaware of this effort. They may have a cursory understanding of it, but really not vested in it. And so you want to try and be able to tell them that storyboard, create that business case for them, provide them with the benefits and how they're going to be involved and their people are going to be involved. So going to creation of the program service offering, this to me is really kind of the methodology that aligns to the BCM&DR life cycle, looking back at like the ISO slide, the Plan, Do, Check, Act perspective. Again, it's creation of those components in the plan and the do and the check and the act sections of that methodology, creating what that means. How are we delivering services in those areas? So as you see down here, detailed service offering summary by each of the life cycle service areas. So trying to define if we're going to do assessments. What does that mean? What type of assessments are we doing internally with people in our organization? Are we doing assessment that's looking at just the BC aspect? Are we looking at, the DR aspect? Are we maybe doing assessment to look at, our current backup capabilities, things of that nature? So defining what that looks like, the phases and activities, tasks that are involved maybe in delivering that assessment work, and what are you expecting to get out of that? So if you came to a leader and said, hey, I want to perform a assessment of where your organization's at from a overall recovery posture perspective, because we maybe don't know where they're at, you can explain to them how we're going to go about performing that activity. Creating a program, glossary of terms. I'm sure all of you know full well that we use a lot of buzzwords and terminology in the organization, or in the industry, and a lot of those times they get thrown around synonymously, and I see the same thing happening internal within organizations as well. So creating a standard glossary of terms that maybe aligns to what's in the industry, what are certain terminology within your own organization, and then as you're going out and you're creating plans, you're creating documentation, you're creating an internal website portal for the programs, you're creating an executive steering committee deck on the program. I think it's imperative that you, as the leader, really stick to a standard glossary of terms and stick with a consistent nomenclature. I see it oftentimes being a smattering of things and it's all over the map. I think it's very important to keep people's understanding and not to confuse individuals and people within the organization to have that in place. And then of course creating all your various templates, tools, things of that nature. Again, the idea here is that with a limited budget, you may not have the luxury of having a off-the-shelf recovery planning tool, or a tool that allows you to do a BIA, or a crisis or emergency mass notification tool. So you may have to be a little do a little more work up front to create some of those tools and templates, so that as you're going out to create create documentation, that you're doing it in a consistent manner, much like we talked about with the glossary of terms. And again, I think from a benefits perspective, again, I think all of these framework foundational materials that can be created, published, socialized are important in not only being able to allow senior leadership, internal, external audit to understand how it is you're delivering services, what are the the benefits of doing that within the organization, how does it make your organization more recoverable, are all things that lend itself well to provide that message. Certainly gives you I think standardization from a methodology and a nomenclature perspective is important, much like I like to think from a technology perspective. If you're dealing with the DR side of the program and with the individuals in your IT organization, you're hoping that we're going to continue to drive towards some, when you're looking at your computer environment, we're driving to some standards from a compute perspective, versus having a smattering of compute capabilities that we can't support, or we can't recover in a timely fashion because we're not standardized. So again, where you can standardize, where you can use consistent nomenclature and continue to drive that through your messaging, through your education and awareness and training, the better. Response and recovery, which goes back to plan, do, check, act perspective. And like I said, I'm using some of the terms here that were, really called out in the ISO framework. Crisis response, I know may be something different in your organization, so on and so forth. But, with that in mind, the idea here is, being able to create a lot of this process up front from a crisis and disaster declaration and response perspective. So really defining those teams, that are going to be required, and they may vary obviously for those who are in the public sector versus those that are in the federal sector. And I really don't go into the federal sector side of things, from a COOP perspective or so on and so forth. But keep that in mind as you're going through this. The idea here is planning in advance to define those teams who are going to be responsible for, not only recovery of a process and application, a system, but those that are going to be overseeing your response and recovery efforts. And that gets into what we talk about there with the EMT and the CMT as well. Defining their roles and responsibilities during, not only during the initial response, but during, recovery. They may have different hats or different roles during those different phases as well. And so we want to be clear what those are up front. Don't want to be doing this, at the onset of an incident. Go through and create, if it's not done already, a disaster declaration process, which really is kind of a matrix of how we're going to assess the situation, who are the individuals that are going to be able to determine we're going to declare, and then what does that process look like, and the dissemination of information that we've essentially declared a disaster, and we're going to fail over to maybe whatever our DR configuration looks like, whether that's something internal, whether that's to an external co-location provider, hot site provider, AWS, etc. And then, going forward, what are we doing from a monitoring, reporting of these functions, both during the, response phase, but also versus the recovery phase. So I think if you can get a lot of that done up front, that'll lend itself well to, when you get into starting to plan, to be able to run some tabletop exercises or walkthroughs or whatever, again, you might want to call that. I know there's a number of terms out there for that as well. So, but, it'll lend itself well for being able to go through and understand, hey, what are we missing? We can create all this, in a room on a conference call, but, from a practical application perspective, does it address everything we need? And going through those walkthroughs with those individuals will help us to determine, hey, we need to put some additional documentation into our plans, into our procedures, et cetera, up front. I mean, I think ultimately some of obviously the big benefits to this is that teams are already defined. People understand their roles or responsibilities during response and recovery. It should, if this has all been done in advance, allow you to then, validate that, we have the, command, control, and coordination during these phases, and we know the handoffs between our, internal teams and between maybe external entities, as well as some of our strategic vendor partners. And again, these are, all these areas of the methodology, the foundational framework are all things that, internal, external auditors are typically looking at from a, compliance perspective. And so if you're able to at least show them, you have some of this in place, or we are working on these types of key items, that goes a long way with those individuals as well. So then getting to, recovery planning, and certainly the idea in this discussion was around the fact that, we don't have a big budget, so we probably don't have an off-the-shelf planning tool, but there may have been one in place. So, assessing, what do we have from, current plans, if any, and what are the condition or shape of those plans. And, a lot of organizations run extremely well just utilizing, Word and Excel, or some sort of homegrown alternatives for their recovery planning. It doesn't mean that you have to have a off-the-shelf tool. It certainly provides some additional capabilities for you from a monitoring, tracking perspective and reporting, and so forth. But certainly utilizing, Word or Excel, like I said, gets back to the idea of, the general patent term, keep it simple. It can be simple, it can be in Word and Excel, but if the content is appropriate and thorough, it will do the job. And of course, plan types, depending on which, if you're in a public sector, private sector, and in the industry, they come in all sorts of flavors as far as what we call them. And so, it may be, people may call response plans, they may call them application recovery plans, business continuity or business resumption or business recovery, DR plans, so on and so forth. But again, based on maybe what's already in place and what people understand and know may be the nomenclature you're going to use for them. The name doesn't necessarily change what's in the content of the plan, and obviously the content of the plan is what's of key importance, ensuring that we have the right information in there, whether it's a recovery plan for a business unit or business function, or whether it's for a piece of our technology. Again, from a benefits perspective, all the, pretty consistent what I've been messaging along the way, so I'm not going to address anything over there. I think you can understand what I'm trying to get across from a benefits perspective, and those are certainly good to keep people in the organization informed of the benefits of these as well. Recovery testing. So obviously, from a recovery testing perspective, we would assume that, if you're doing some of this, you maybe have already been a little bit more of a mature organization from a recovery, from a BCM&DR perspective. That might not always be the case. One of the things you might be asked to do right out of the gate coming into an organization is to, test an application, test a system, provide a proof that we can recover, A, B, or C. And yet you might go through your assessment and say, well, you don't have any documentation on what that recovery configuration looks like, or recovery plans for what you want me to test, or a process for who's going to be involved. So again, understand where you're at from an assessment perspective, baseline it, and then determine how we want to move forward with testing. And it comes in all sorts of flavors. And I think it's important that you understand and define in your methodology what are the different types of tests, who are the types of individuals involved in those tests, what are the outputs of those types of tests, and then start to put together a testing methodology and a test timeline, and that may run in parallel or be part of your short or long-term roadmap. You may decide to forelay doing testing until you have completed more understanding of the requirements, going through a BIA, defining teams, developing plans, and so forth. But if you have some of that in place already, or been tasked to do some testing up front, you have a different different types of tests and a methodology behind it that'll help you to educate your champions, your stakeholders, the people that will be involved in test planning and doing tests going forward. So from a budget perspective, I tried to just focus in on, and I've got 2 slides here around, the business continuity assessment tools. There's a number of companies out there that have tools that will allow you to assess the overall maturity, where you're at with various aspects from a planning, testing, perspective. There's obviously a number of toolkits and templates out there, whether you're in the government space or in the public sector that are out there. And I'm sure there's a plethora of others that I have not come across, but certainly, feel free to leverage items like this if you don't have, in fact, a experience with, delivering these types of services in the organization, or there's nothing in place to date. You might want to start from ground zero. Some of these can provide some good insight, based on individuals, organizations that have been, doing this for a long time and putting out helpful, products and tips out there. There's also, from emergency notification software, obviously a number of different products out there as well. I've seen organizations use all sorts of other homegrown ways to communicate, so it's really just an idea of, what's in place today in your organization, if anything. And then, if there's pieces of those items, from a quick wins perspective, or maybe your senior leadership mandate that says, hey, we need to define our emergency or crisis response process and test whether we can communicate out. Well, then, maybe you're going to need to look into leveraging some of these types of for free or low cost options to expedite that. Or if it's part of more of your long-term roadmap, you can, dovetail that in. It gives you more time to do some research on different products, different offerings, different toolkits and templates and things like that that'll help you along the way. All right. Well, that really is about it. I know it came in probably about a couple minutes long. I tried to just put a lot of information in slides that are good for you to take away. Hopefully some of it you can leverage along the way, and help you with getting started wherever you happen to be at, in your organizational program development there. So Bob, do you want to open it up for any questions?
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. And if, again, you do have any questions for Michael, you can locate the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to as many as we can as possible. There are some that might be a little in-depth. If we don't get to them here today, Michael and the Virtual Corp team will have access to them afterwards, and we'll follow up with everyone. So several questions have come in already. First one, you had mentioned disaster declaration matrix. Could you explain what that might be?
Well, I've had it coined with other customers in a lot of different forms and fashion, but the idea, this really came about with a healthcare organization that wanted to leverage more of the kind of command and control aspect that some of those individuals had seen in the military space. And it was about creating a checklist or matrix of what are the parameters that needed to occur before the next item on the checklist occurred. And so it was a different way to basically outline what items needed to be met before we could move forward into the next phase. And so, like I said, it was a very, very much checklist driven matrix, and you couldn't do, if 1, 2, and 3 were met, you could do, 4 and 5, but 4 and 5, once 4 and 5 were met, then you could do number 6 and so forth like that.
All right, next question here. Who are my champions, or who should they be?
Well, that really also I think depends on where you are aligned in the organization. If you're responsible for, like this slide presentation says, everything in business continuity management and disaster recovery, I think certainly then it should be an executive leader, either a CIO or a CTO or a CEO. But I've seen, it depends on, again, where you're aligned. I've seen these programs aligned to someone in the finance organization, someone in the risk and audit and compliance organization. So I think it's imperative you understand where you align in the organization, and that may dictate who you focus efforts on trying to engage as a champion if that champion hasn't been identified or given to you.
All right, next question here. Risk management or internal audit, would you consider them friends or foe?
I think for the individuals that have to support you cross-functionally in the organization, so the people that are going to be doing some planning with you and testing with you and so forth, they oftentimes view those individuals as foe, because we're always going to be coming to them and saying, hey, risk has identified these maybe for example these technical risks, and we have to address those, and so it's going to require us to create a project to address these risks. So I think from a program perspective, they are our biggest advocate. They are the ones that can help us push initiatives, push projects, push things up to senior leaders, to the executive level. If we're not getting traction, we're not getting people's time, resources, we're maybe not getting support from a funding perspective, these people are definitely your should be your biggest advocates.
All right, somebody had a question. Could you please provide any insight on DR in the cloud? There are a few applications moving, or I guess many applications moving to the cloud. How is this different than traditional DR?
And I hear that question a lot. Well, I mean, my take on that is, if you've been around as long as I have, organizations leveraged, if they didn't have their own internal data center and a DR data center, they would typically leverage a hot site provider, SunGard, IBM, HP. There were, a plethora of hot site providers that would allow you to create a recovery configuration, and it was in a shared model with other other customers as well. And then obviously co-locations became big here in the last 15 years, and then you're seeing the presence of cloud providers, Azure and AWS and others, that are providing, at the end of the day, they're still providing capacity. They're providing a target capability of sorts to you as a customer. They're providing the security and infrastructure around that as well. I don't view DR in the cloud much different than I do DR in the fact, other than that, I'm trying to think of how I want to say it. You're providing, they're providing you with, a capability that they're responsible to, provide a level of reliability, security, and performance for you. So as long as you spend some time with your provider up front defining what those requirements are, in my opinion, it shouldn't be any different recovering to the your cloud provider than it was maybe recovering to your own internal DR data center, other than that they're managing that infrastructure.
All right, next question here. How do who do you usually see leading business continuity activity? For context, is it the CEO or COO or a finance director, etc.?
Having spent probably 15, 16 years of my 23 in a consulting role, I've seen it in every one of those C-level organizations, and I've also seen it, reporting into, DR or IT organizations and to people on risk management, audit, compliance. So I've seen it everywhere, and I don't know that there's a recipe for where exactly it should sit. I think it's dependent on the organization as a whole, but I think it's important that it sits at a high enough level that it gets the visibility that it deserves, and that you get the that stakeholder, executive level champion support that's needed to drive all your your project initiatives, because as you all well know, you require a lot of time of other people in the organization to get done what you've been tasked to do. So sorry, it's not a straightforward answer, I don't think.
All right, next question here. I'm tasked with building a brand new program from scratch. Where do I begin?
Well, like I said, building a brand new program from scratch, I had the fortunate chance to do that myself earlier in my career, but I did not take it wholesale that they didn't have things in place. So I like I said, I really went back and kind of assessed this, the situation, what was in place, what was not in place. So a lot of what I talked about early on, really, did a lot of digging, talking with a lot of people, building relationships with, individual contributors, on business and IT side, but also leaders. And then once I really understood, where things were at, started to create that foundation, that service offering methodology, creating the charter and the mission, getting sign off on that from leaders. I think getting all of that in place for how you're going to, deliver services against the life cycle is imperative, for your success, and certainly benefits you, and if your team, if you're able to bring people on to expand the team, help with that, that storyboard, that business case, that conversation with, senior leaders, members of the, business and IT organization, et cetera, to level set them on why it is we're doing things, how it is we're doing it, how you're involved in doing it, the types of people and resources and time level of effort that, it may require of your people to do it, So getting that foundation in place, I think is, your biggest benefit.
All right, so that ends the Q&A. There are many, many questions. We have probably 17, 18 questions we did not get to here today. If we didn't get to your question, Michael and the Virtual Corp team will have access to these questions, and we'll follow up with you after the webinar is ended. So any parting words here today, Michael?
Good luck. You'll need it. There's a lot to do. I mean, we all know that, but that's, I think, part of what, drives us all to, to be involved in this type of work is, you kind of have your hands in everything in the organization. And I think that's exciting. You get a chance to meet everybody from, your CEO down to, individual contributors across the organization. I think that's exciting. So, good luck and have fun with it.
All right, wonderful. Thanks again, everyone, for your attendance here today. We hope you gathered some great information from today's webinar. I'd also like to personally thank Michael for his time here today, as well as Virtual Corporation for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording. You may view that recording as frequently as you wish, or share it with your peers. If you have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thank you again, and this now ends today's webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bob.